All right, let's dive into a story that honestly feels like it's straight out of a mystery novel. But this isn't fiction. This is science, and it's a 4,000-year-old genetic ghost story.
So let me just ask you this. What if a whole, unique group of people could thrive for 4,000 years, and then, poof, in what's basically a blink of an eye in historical terms, they just disappear? Not just from their homes, but from our entire genetic record.
See, this isn't just some wild idea. Our story here kicks off with a very real discovery of what scientists are calling a ghost lineage. It's like finding a phantom population whose story was buried deep inside ancient DNA recovered from South America.
I mean, you really have to think about that timescale. For 4,000 years, this completely distinct group of people was doing their thing, surviving, thriving, and then nothing. Their unique DNA signature just vanishes. It's like an entire chapter of the human story was just ripped out.
And what's wild is that we can actually pinpoint the moment their trail goes cold with some pretty amazing accuracy. We're talking around 2000 BCE. After that, genetically speaking, they are gone.
So, you're probably wondering, how in the world do we even know about a population that disappeared so long ago? Well, it all comes down to some absolutely incredible scientific detective work.
The main clue in this whole mystery comes from a huge study that was just published in the journal Science Advances. So, this isn't just guesswork. We're talking about serious, cutting-edge research here.
And the tool these science detectives used, it's called ancient DNA analysis. And it's an amazing field, really. Scientists can pull these tiny, tiny fragments of genetic material from things like ancient bones and teeth, and then piece them all together to literally read the stories of people who lived thousands of years ago. It's basically a biological time machine.
Now, to really get how weird this is, we gotta look at the bigger picture, right? So the first people made their way into the Americas around 20,000 years ago. This lost group, though, they show up in the record much, much later, only about 6,000 years ago. And then, just 2,000 years after that, they're gone. They were a really significant, but it turns out a pretty short-lived part of this massive human story.
Okay, so who were these people? Thanks to all this DNA work, we can actually start to paint a picture of what their lives were like, to give this ghost a face.
So we know they lived up on these high plateaus, right near where Bogota, Colombia is today. They were hunter-gatherers, living off the land in what would have been a pretty tough environment. And here's the key. They were genetically isolated. They were totally distinct from any other known groups in the Americas at that time.
And get this, they were living at an altitude of about 8,500 feet. Living that high up requires some specific biological tricks to deal with less oxygen. So this wasn't just any old group. These people were specialists, perfectly adapted to their home in the mountains.
And here it is, the really crucial point. They weren't just a slightly different version of the folks living nearby. No, their DNA was so distinct that it formed its very own separate branch on the human family tree. Finding them it's like finding out you had a long-lost cousin you never ever knew existed.
Which, of course, brings us right back to the central mystery. If they were so unique and so well adapted to their environment, where did they go? What could have possibly caused this great vanishing?
The genetic evidence points to something really dramatic, a total population replacement. For thousands of years, you had this one unique group. Then, around 2000 BCE, a brand new, genetically different population shows up. The DNA of these newcomers sticks around and becomes dominant, while the DNA of that original group completely disappears.
So, what could have happened? Well, scientists are looking at three main theories. First, maybe they were absorbed. They just intermarried with the newcomers so much that their unique genetic signature got diluted into nothing. Second, maybe they were displaced, outcompeted for food and land, and just forced to move on. Or the third and most dramatic possibility, they just vanished, wiped out by war or a new disease or maybe some sudden change in the climate.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's a fascinating little story from the past, but this discovery, it's actually part of a much bigger shift in how we understand our own deep history.
Because the big takeaway here is that this kind of thing isn't an isolated incident. The story of how our world was populated wasn't some simple straight line from A to B. It was messy, it was dynamic, it was full of entire populations rising and falling, moving and mixing in ways we are only just now starting to grasp. This lost group is the perfect example of that.
And this kind of stuff is happening everywhere we look. New genetic research is showing that early Americans had DNA from ancient Denisovans that helped their immune systems. They're finding other unknown lineages all over the place. It's even shedding new light on old historical mysteries like what happened to the Roanoke colony. This whole field is just exploding.
I think this quote just sums it up perfectly. The first draft of history is being rewritten one genome at a time. The history that you and I learned in school, that was just the beginning. Now we're adding all this incredible new detail and uncovering lost characters from our shared human story.
So, the ultimate point is this. The book on human history is nowhere near closed. In fact, it feels like we might just be getting to the most exciting chapters because there are still so many secrets buried right there in our own DNA.
And that kind of leaves us with one last really tantalizing thought. This group was found on a high plateau in Colombia. But how many other lost populations, how many more of these ghost lineages are still out there? Their stories just hidden in ancient dust, waiting for the right detective to come along and find them.